suspension, modified Mustang 2, tubular upper and lower control arms.
What'd you say?
In April 2014, Richard Rawlings sold Discovery's audience on the discovery of a lifetime. Two neglected prototype Pontiac Firebirds worth $325,000 apiece, found gathering dust in a barn like nobody had thought to look. Nobody had thought to look because the same two cars had already changed hands online for a fraction of that price, sitting in that exact barn the whole time, waiting for a camera crew to stage their rediscovery. Fast and Loud was a show about finding buried treasure that got caught burying the treasure itself. That's not a scandal. That's the whole business model wearing a flannel shirt. Discovery Channel spent 8 years selling Richard Rawlings as a blue-collar prophet who could smell $100 grand under a pile of rust, while quietly producing his miracles for him behind the scenes. Fans caught the discrepancy themselves, digging up the old listing and doing the math. Discovery apparently hoped nobody would bother with. A show built on the romance of the unscripted find turned out to need a script more than any sitcom on the network, and it needed an audience too polite to check its receipts. So before Fast and Loud became Discovery's longest-running garage sale with a fake receipt, it started as something a lot of people genuinely believed in, and for a while they were right to. Richard Rawlings and Aaron Kaufman had already been building cars together for roughly 2 years, before Gas Monkey Garage even existed, since Rawlings was still running a printing company called Lincoln Press and moonlighting on the side with the guy who actually knew how to hold a wrench.
That one a lot more, but this one's around what
In 2004, Rawlings sold Lincoln Press and used the money to open Gas Monkey Garage in Dallas, betting a stable business on an unstable one, and pulling Kaufman in as the shop's lead mechanic. It was, on paper, a terrible financial decision. It also happened to be the correct one. For 8 years, Gas Monkey Garage was exactly what it looked like. A real shop doing real work, restoring rust buckets for customers who wanted a classic car back on the road rather than a television deal.
Structural and the other stuff, there's no reason to spend the money to fix it because it's just wasted time and effort.
Discovery Channel picked up the show in 2012, and the premiere, Model A Madness, pulled in less than 1 million viewers on a rented shop floor on Reeder Road in Dallas. Nobody involved was famous yet. Nobody involved was rich yet. The whole appeal was that these were two guys who might genuinely lose money on the next car they bought, and the audience could tell the difference. That difference is the thing television eventually cannot resist monetizing to death.
Honestly, that goes further to me than putting some weird color that we think is cool on or getting into a real serious paint job.
Rawlings had the mouth and the deal-making instinct. Kaufman had the hands and the patience, and Discovery had a decade of content sitting inside a partnership that worked precisely because nobody involved was performing yet.
What we're bargaining here for is a body.
I don't know. I'm thinking about $1,200.
A show can survive a fake barn find. It has a much harder time surviving what happens when the two people who made it real start wanting different things from the thing they built. That tension didn't show up in season 1. It didn't need to yet, but it was already sitting in the garage, waiting for the moment the cameras got good enough at their jobs to catch it. That tension surfaced first somewhere nobody expected, in the shop's own hiring decisions.
I gotta see how it feels.
It's dusty, dirty, but
I don't care. I've been dirty before.
In February 2014, Gas Monkey Garage found the most efficient way yet to manufacture drama for a reality show by firing 2 of its own mechanics, Tom Smith and Jordan Butler, over a photo. A fan had asked to pose with Rawlings' Rolls-Royce. The mechanic said yes, the on-duty manager said no, and the resulting shouting match cost both men their jobs. The 2 men didn't disappear quietly. They resurfaced that same year on a brand new Discovery spinoff called Misfit Garage, a show built entirely around former Gas Monkey employees who'd been pushed out the door, which is either a remarkably efficient use of Discovery's talent pool or the most honest thing the network ever produced. A show whose premise was literally people Richard Rawlings couldn't keep. The bigger crack had a face the audience actually loved. In late 2016, Aaron Kaufman, the mechanic whose hands built the show's credibility one panel gap at a time,
You need to take your boots off, use your toes.
We're not going that high.
told Rawlings he needed some time off and called it an extended vacation. It was not an extended vacation. By the end of the year, Kaufman confirmed he was leaving Gas Monkey Garage permanently, quoting Stevie Nicks on his way out the door, saying he had to go his own way, and pointing to roughly 14 years of deadlines that had worn him down to the point where the last 5 felt like 20. Rawlings responded on the Gas Monkey blog with the kind of statement companies write when they need to sound gracious and threatened at the same time, calling Kaufman's exit a big hit to the shop, then immediately insisting it would be an insult to everyone else there to suggest Gas Monkey Garage couldn't function without him. Two men who had built cars together since around 2003 were now processing their breakup through separate public statements, which is a fairly on-brand way for a show about restoration to handle its own falling apart. What Kaufman took with him wasn't just a beard and a wrench, it was the show's entire internal logic. Fast and Loud had always worked as a two-hander, the salesman and the craftsman, the mouth and the hands. Remove one and Discovery didn't have a partnership anymore, it had a solo act wearing a partnership's old clothes.
No change.
Season 13 opened in 2017 with Rawlings and the crew hot rodding a step van without Aaron for the first time. And by episode 3, he'd already brought in an outside guest builder, Brian Bass, essentially auditioning replacement chemistry on camera because the real thing had walked out the door. The show kept running, kept finding cars, kept hitting deadlines, but it ran the way a three-legged table runs after you saw off the fourth leg and lean it against the wall instead. Kaufman, meanwhile, got his own spinoff, Shifting Gears, which let him build cars at his own pace for once, without a Gas Monkey clock counting down over his shoulder. It lasted 2 seasons. The Dream Team, once split in half, turned out to be a format that didn't work particularly well for either half on its own. In early 2017, Discovery decided the only thing better than one reality show about cars was 2 reality shows racing each other.
Just the materials alone are going to cost more than $3,000, but it's going to be worth it.
And built an entire crossover event, Street Outlaws versus Fast and Loud, around a head-to-head grudge match called the Mega Race. Big Chief, the actual street racer, accused Rawlings' team of breaking the agreed rules by swapping in a hired NHRA professional driver instead of getting behind the wheel himself. Fans smelled it immediately. Forums lit up calling the whole spectacle scripted before the credits even rolled. A show that had already been caught staging a barn discovery built an entire television special around proving it could really race, and found itself accused of rigging the very race meant to prove it wasn't staged. The years that followed brought the part of the story that had nothing to do with cars at all.
We got a free set of wheels, which was really generous. Problem is, though, generosity only goes so far.
In 2018, the owners of Gas Monkey Bar and Grill, the restaurant chain that had licensed Rawlings' own name and logo, filed a $6 million defamation and breach of contract lawsuit against him on behalf of managing partner Daniel Flaherty. $6 million over a restaurant. Rawlings countersued the following year for copyright infringement, seeking $1 million of his own. This was a man suing and being sued by a business that existed purely because people trusted the Gas Monkey name enough to put it on a building. The case dragged on for 3 years before both sides quietly settled in 2021, at which point the restaurant simply renamed itself Amplified Live and told the public it had never had anything to do with Richard Rawlings in the first place, a level of brand distancing usually reserved for products that get recalled. By the time the dust settled, Fast and Loud had exiled its own mechanics into a spinoff, lost its most beloved star to a public breakup, faced accusations of rigging a race after already getting caught faking a find, and collected lawsuits the way other shows collected trophies. The garage was still standing. The cars still rolled out the door.
Quality paint job, custom wheels and tires, and worked his crew around the clock.
But the version of Fast and Loud people had fallen in love with in 2012, 2 guys who might genuinely lose money on the next car, was long gone, replaced by a franchise held together mostly by Rawlings' willingness to keep showing up. What nobody knew yet was that the actual reason the show would end had nothing to do with any of this. It had already been written into Rawlings' own contract years earlier, in a clause he probably wishes he'd read more carefully. Here's the thing. Nobody wants to admit about the ending. It wasn't a collapse, it was a contract working exactly as designed. Richard Rawlings finally explained what happened on Joe Rogan's podcast in December 2020, 6 months after the last episode had quietly aired, and the reason turned out to be almost too perfect.
Per occurrence of you talking shit?
Me talking shit.
Well, can I talk shit?
You can talk as much shit as you
I
want.
love the Discovery Channel.
He'd reportedly signed away control of his own media presence to Discovery.
Where's Christy at? Let's get these things on Craigslist. Free.
What's wrong with we just powder coated them?
And agreed to a clause that could fine him $25,000 every single time he said something negative about the network. A show that spent 8 years selling the fantasy of a guy who answers to nobody was the entire time contractually forbidden from complaining about the people he answered to. That's not bad luck. That's a man getting exactly what he signed for. Surprised the ink still worked 8 years later. Fast and Loud was selling the idea of two independent guys operating outside the system and putting that idea inside a network contract with a gag clause and a media rights transfer built a show whose entire premise contradicts its own paperwork. The Firebird barn find wasn't an isolated cheat, it was a preview, and neither was the mega race. Once Kaufman left with the independent Craftsman half of the pitch, all that remained was Rawlings performing independence for a company that legally owned his voice, and audiences can smell that hollow even when they can't name it. The show didn't die from a scandal loud enough to cancel it. It died from becoming structurally incapable of being what it claimed to be, and a pandemic year gave everyone a convenient excuse to finally admit it. Discovery, for its part, had already started recycling the format before the original even wrapped, handing Rawlings his own spinoff.
We may not have the wheels available, so it's just something that me and Richard are going to have to get together on and make a decision.
Garage Rehab in 2017 to fix other people's failing shops the same year his own partnership was quietly falling apart. Once the partnership that made it feel real was gone, there was nothing left to restore except the illusion. And illusions don't need 16 seasons, they need a highlight reel. Fittingly, a 2016 New York Times analysis of Facebook engagement found Fast and Loud pulled a higher share of its likes from men than almost any other show surveyed, 83%. A network handed a near-perfect lock on exactly the audience it was busy lying to. Gas Monkey Garage didn't disappear when Discovery pulled the plug. It just moved to a platform with even less oversight. Back in 2019, while the show still aired, Rawlings had already licensed the Gas Monkey name to an energy drink line, Manufactured Authenticity now selling manufactured energy.
But we've got 3 guys working on it, so gonna haul ass, see if we can't make it.
Today, the shop runs its own YouTube channel, no editorial layer between Rawlings and the camera, which sounds like liberation until you remember self-regulation was never the problem. The incentive to stage a good story always was. Which raises the only question this show ever answered honestly by accident. If the fantasy needed a script the entire time, what exactly was anyone restoring? For a while, Fast and Loud actually delivered on what it promised. 2 guys with more nerve than money, turning junkyard scraps into something people wanted to bid on, and an audience that could genuinely tell the difference between a real find and a fake one. That version of the show existed. It just didn't survive contact with 16 seasons, a network contract, and the discovery that manufactured barns sell better than real ones.
But it's not going to be easy. This is a massive job that's going to take every bit of Gas Monkey ingenuity.
Everything that followed was the slow replacement of substance with performance. A mechanic traded for a solo act, a partnership traded for a gag clause, and a shop's reputation quietly outsourced to whichever platform required the least oversight that week. Richard Rawlings didn't lose Fast and Loud to a scandal big enough to end it. He lost it to a contract he signed before he understood what nearly a decade of fame would cost him to walk away from. And by the time he figured that out, the only honest thing left to restore was his own freedom to talk. So no, Fast and Loud wasn't a bust from day one, and that's actually the more depressing version of this story. It worked. It worked well enough to make a printing salesman famous, well enough to spin off 2 other shows, well enough to lock a man into silence about his own success. Somewhere between the Model A in season 1 and the Firebirds that weren't really barn finds, the show stopped being about rescuing forgotten cars and started being about how long you can fake finding them before the audience notices the same barn twice. Like, subscribe, and unlike Richard Rawlings, we're actually allowed to tell you what we really think.